All right, welcome to another episode of Buzz Beat. We appreciate you tuning in and making us a part of your day. Happy trade deadline day to those who celebrate, which I assume is pretty much everyone, save for fans of the Luka-less Dallas Mavericks. Welcome to a special 2025 trade deadline show of Buzz Beat. I'm Brian Geisinger. Today we've got a full house. I will be joined by Buzz Beat Professor Emeritus Spencer Percy. Darian, of course, my co-host, is back here. Richie Randall is producing on the ones and twos, and we are very fortunate to have. I think at this point, I don't want to cast shade on anyone, but I will say the best, most prolific guest in the history of Buzzbeat, Div, one of the best NBA and Hornets follows on Twitter. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll just go ahead and start with you, Spencer. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. How are you? How are you feeling, man?
I'm good. Hey, hold on. I'm gonna go refill my champagne glass real quick. I'll be right back. Plenty to celebrate here, BG. I'm doing great. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Excellent. And Div, welcome back. How have things been going in your neck of the woods?
Thanks, BG. Things have been going great, and yeah, it's been a fun couple of days on the Hornets ride. I think Mitch Kupchak just woke up right now, and he's just getting news as we speak. So it's exciting.
The phone is on. The phone is on. It's made it. Trades can happen here, and yeah, this is. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, but this is certainly unprecedented territory. And lastly, Darian, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I always say, however the Hornets are doing, that's how I'm doing. So today, they're doing great. So I feel great.
Yeah, careful. Check in on your buddies every now and then. But yes, this is even with the Hornets moving on from Mark Williams, this does seem to be a very exciting, interesting time period for the Hornets. So why don't we sort of like recap just what the last few weeks have been, going back 3-4 weeks. The Hornets trade center Nick Richards and a second round pick to the Suns for Josh Okogie, and 3 second round picks. That was a 2026 from Denver, 2031 second round picks from Denver and Phoenix. Richie recorded a solo pod on that a few weeks ago. Then this week on Monday night, just the blockbuster of trade deadline season. Charlotte, Oklahoma City swapped second round picks. Charlotte now controls Denver's 2030 second round pick and traded that to OKC for Phoenix's 2029 second round pick. But this week, seeing Mark Williams going out the door to the Los Angeles Lakers, and Cody Martin being shipped to the Phoenix Suns in return for Yusuf Nurkic. And some picks. We'll get into all of that here in a second. But before we sort of jump in, I kind of wanted to just quickly take an inventory check on what the Charlotte Hornets right now have sort of in terms of like draft assets built up for the next. They control their picks for the next 7 years. That starts with the 2025 lotto pick. Charlotte currently has the 4th best odds at the number 1 overall pick. They have a 2027 top 14 protected first round pick from Miami that becomes unprotected in 28. It's a good asset, good chip. 2027 top 2 protected first round pick from Dallas, courtesy of the PJ Washington trade a year ago. All of a sudden, with Luka out, an aging roster in Dallas, Spencer, you were texting the group thread about this earlier, but that certainly feels like a pretty powerful pick that the Hornets have waiting in the wings for them here. Certainly some slight protections there. And if the pick falls within its protected range and is therefore not conveyed, then Dallas will instead convey Miami's 2028 second round pick to Charlotte. They have 2030 swap rights in the first round with the Lakers, and a 2031 unprotected first round pick from the Los Angeles Lakers. And I guess I'm missing something there too. I did not include, forgive me, I don't believe I included the 2026 first round pick that's coming in via the Cody Martin trade. So a lot of surplus picks, and certainly some interesting, good, talented young players out the door over the last, 12, 15 months for Charlotte. Div, since you're the guest, I'm going to send it to you first. And then let me just recount the principles for the trade too. The Hornets ship out Mark Williams to the Los Angeles Lakers. In return, they get rookie 2 guard Dalton Connect, veteran wing Cam Reddish, the 2031 first round pick unprotected, and the 2030 pick swap. Div, when this, I don't know if you were up late enough last night when this news went out, or if you saw it first thing this morning on your phone, but just instant reaction to the Mark Williams deal, and sort of any thoughts you had throughout the day, sort of like processing what is a pretty substantial trade for the Hornets.
Yeah, as I thought about it more and more, I was up when it happened, and as I thought about it more and more during the day, I like it more and more for both teams. I think it makes a lot of sense for both teams. You can quibble about it, is it an overpay on one side? Is it an underpay? Should there have been a little more? I think ultimately Mark Williams was on the rookie deal for one more year through next year. And so this offseason and or the beginning of next year was going to be kind of a crucial time anyway in figuring out what his future was going to be. So by getting ahead of that a little bit, the Hornets turned that into an unprotected first. And I know it's years out and you could say there's a good chance Luka's going to be there, but look back 7 years at teams that we assumed were going to be good 7 years later now, right? And a lot of things can change. And so I think, being able to get an unprotected pick, in addition to the top 2 protected pick that we've got coming in as well, and the lottery protected one from Miami, those are really good assets. So, in my mind, being able to get that is always going to cost you something. You're never going to get an unprotected pick without giving up something of value. I think Mark Williams has had his struggles with rim protection, but I also think that's probably a little bit about coming back from injuries and a little bit about the situation around him as well. If your perimeter defenders never keep anybody in front of them, that's going to make the rim protector's job harder. So, I think he's going to do great with the Lakers. I think he's going to give them a lot of what they need. Luka needs a vertical threat to throw to. I think he's going to do very well with that. But, I think the pick is really nice. And I also think I'm not sleeping on Dalton Connect. I know he's an older rookie. We're still talking about somebody who isn't 24 yet. It's not like they're a done deal. Talking to a couple of Lakers fans today, the biggest concern that they had about Dalton is he athletic enough to make it defensively in the NBA? There's no question about his shooting. He's athletic in terms of being able to dunk it. He's already got 32 dunks this year, which given his pretty limited playing time is really nice to see. He's strong. He's got a great frame. But I think the question is, can he convert all of that into just adequate defense? He doesn't have to be great. Just can he be adequate on that side? And I think for a guy who's not yet 24, that's a good risk to take. Kevin Pelton actually mentioned that hilariously enough, he may now be the favorite for Rookie of the Year this year because he's going to get a lot of opportunity in Charlotte that he didn't get before. So hang the banner if that happens. But I think overall, it's a very fair trade, and I think it points to a clear path, which is really encouraging.
Yeah, I feel like too some of the sort of numbers with Mark as far as defending stuff at the rim. I kind of wonder if his obviously coming back from injury, but also just what his role has been this year, which is a little different. He's playing a lot more of the sort of roam, defensive center, a lot more sort of low man help responsibilities, and less sort of just traditional every night center, especially, when they're playing against, stretch fives. And then, Charles Lee is often using a 4 to, defend those actions, and then have Mark, sort of lurk closer around the basket. I hear all the concerns with Connect athletically, defensively. I get it. We talked about him a fair amount leading into the draft last year. The three of us right here on this pod, Darian, Spencer, and I. The shooting is impressive. He shot it well as a rookie, and that to me is just I like adding a shooting component around LaMelo, a quick trigger movement shooter they've been really starved for it, especially with Brandon sort of like in and out of the lineup and then just done for the season. So like I like that. I like adding that element to it as well. This does mean Charlotte has to start over with fighting like a lob threat for LaMelo, but they've got a long timeline to sort of like try to, or a longer timeline to sort of like fill that out. But yeah, Spencer, instant thoughts on or your first initial thoughts and sort of like if those have changed throughout the day on the Mark Williams to Los Angeles move with the Hornets.
Yeah, I mean, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning to go use the restroom and looked at my phone and was like, okay, I won't be going back to sleep for a while. So I think this is, how could you say no to this deal if you're Jeff Peterson in Charlotte? I mean, this to get a Dalton Connect who is essentially an extra first round pick here, right? And then you get an unprotected pick at 31, and then you get a pick swap in 30. And Div already made the points about we have no idea where the Lakers and the 32-year-old Luka Doncic are going to be 6 years from now. It's just a no-brainer. And I talked to somebody pretty close to the team to get their thoughts on Mark Williams and his prospects of being healthy moving forward. And there was, let's make it clear, there was some serious concern in Charlotte. In that franchise and that organization about him moving forward. Foot and back issues on a 7'2" human being don't age. I mean, historically, there's just not a lot of success stories. So I don't see how they could have done better. I mean, the value was never going to be higher, I don't think. But as Div was saying, I also get it from LA's perspective, right? Like Luka, LeBron, they're going to make his life so easy, certainly offensively. We'll see. Defensively, he's going to be in the spotlight now, right? Like people are going to dissect him from every angle now that he's on the Lakers and is on national TV every single game. So we're going to find out. I think a lot of that has been hidden from the NBA spotlight previous to now, but I think this is an awesome deal for Charlotte. Zooming out, going 50,000 feet and looking down here, it's just so encouraging to me that we have a front office and an ownership group that are aligned and see the forest through the trees, right? And are willing to play the long game and take risk. I mean, you can consider this a risk. I think it's a no-brainer, as I explained, and we'll get into the other trades. But this is what a competent franchise looks like. This is exactly what it looks like. And the hard part starts now. The easy part is selling something at a high value. The hard part is when to capitalize on those assets that you get, what the price needs to be for that said player or players, and what the timing looks like. And so the hard part starts now. And we're going to move forward assuming that LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller are the two core pieces that they're going to build around. And so maybe it's a different conversation for a different day, but you have 227 picks, Miami, Dallas. As you mentioned earlier, BG, that Miami pick turns into an unprotected pick if it doesn't convey in 28. The Dallas pick, it's almost a guarantee it'll convey in 27. And then there's a 3-year gap a 4-year gap, I guess, before you get the 31 LA pick. So that's where the tricky part comes from Charlotte, is when to capitalize on the assets that they have in the cupboard now, which doesn't rival OKC, but it rivals just about every other franchise in the league, I think. So it's a great position to be in, and now you got to trust the people to make the right decisions at the right time.
Yeah, I think first off, I know it's sort of like a different orders, it's like orders of magnitude different, but like Mark did play 2 seasons at Duke, and like that is in every game's nationally televised. Like I know it's college ball. It's not the Lakers, obviously, but like there is some. You do play in a bit of a fishbowl when you're at Duke. So to an extent, I think he at least had like a diet version of what's coming, but it's going to be way different playing with the Lakers and LeBron, obviously. Yeah, it does feel like we'll talk about this more at some point, but like I'm sure, but like guys like Grant and Miles that have 2 years beyond this season on their contract, like. Those feel like the trade chips at the deadline next year, assuming, Grant's healthy. Darian, I'd be curious to know sort of like two things here.
Mhm.
One, your thoughts on the Mark Williams trade, just sort of instant reaction and where you've gone with it from then. And then secondly, if the Hornets are going to build this up around LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, it does seem like they've extended the scope of the rebuild. Like the aperture is different now. How do you think do you think it's possible to get those guys on board? Like essentially, can you have those guys playing like good, good developmental basketball and being on board with the fact that the team doesn't look like it's projected to be super good anytime too soon? I don't think the Hornets are built to sort of like at this point juggle multiple timelines at the same time. Like I think this is sort of like a focused, longer approach. So just thoughts on that with LaMelo and Brandon.
Yeah. So to your first question about like my reaction was I really couldn't believe it. I'm a Mark Williams fan, but you and I talked on here maybe it was a month ago at this point where I was saying that the way Musa has been playing, it allows you to at least consider the future of the center position with the Hornets if you weren't happy with either. At that point, Nick wasn't traded either, so it allows you to at least consider. Not to look at him as a starter, not to look at him as the future of the Hornets center position, but more so, okay, in this vacuum of this season where the season's basically already over, can we look to move off these guys? So for Spencer to say, talk about how it is concerning with Mark's health, that goes to, okay, well, if Musa wasn't playing the way he was, it just maybe this doesn't happen, or maybe this doesn't, they're not as confident as we can trade both of our centers and capitalize on both of them. As far as what the Lakers gave up, I'm surprised. But at the same time, for the Hornets, I mean, that's just so you cannot say no to that deal. That if you're already worried about him, you cannot say no. I think even if Mark, let's just say he was healthy, but still had some of the flaws that we all know that he has, even then you would have to consider the deal just because of the simple fact that the team as a whole cannot stay healthy. And Mark, it was almost, as Div mentioned, it's almost time to pay him. And you can't keep paying people and hoping, okay, well, one day we'll get it right because we've already paid LaMelo, we've paid Miles, technically Grant and Josh Green are paid. And it's not to say they can't be moved, but these guys are already on the books. There's also Trey Mann. We don't know what's going on with that. So you just can't keep paying people and hoping that eventually it all aligns. And then by that point, Melo's at the last year or two of his deal, and then you're kind of stuck. So I think that they realize maybe it's just best for us to move. And, we also know how new front offices go in terms of just trying to get their guys in. But he was the least – I felt as though it was possible for him to get traded, but he was the last person on the list as far as who I thought would get traded. As for the Lakers standpoint, it just makes sense. If anybody can afford to, trade for a guy who – on a team that's not good and has defensive woes and, may have back and foot injury, it's the Lakers because somehow they're going to find a way to get out of it. That's just what they do. As far as like buy-in from LaMelo and Brandon, I would assume, I don't know what kind of Brandon, I feel he just strikes me as a along for the ride kind of guy. But LaMelo, they mentioned that, they sat down with him and explained to him their idea and he bought in. Every team will say that, but I just don't have no reason to believe otherwise as far as him not being bought in. We all know that he's not as sometimes you almost wish he was as vocal as he was when he was on that show with his family because the version we have of LaMelo now is the complete opposite of that. So you almost wish that he was like that a little more just so you can see what he was thinking. But I don't think there's anything that leads us to believe that he's not bought in. So I think, it does look weird now. Obviously, Nurkic isn't your center of the future. And, another point is we're still only top 4 for we only have the 4th odds for the first pick. So it's not a guarantee we'll get Cooper or any of the top 3 guys really that you feel as though could change, maybe help boost this timeline. So it's a little bit of a risk, but I have no idea what Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson told LaMelo, but it seems as though it's working because I don't even think there's been any kind of leaks or anything in regards to LaMelo. He's always himself as in high spirit. So it's just hard to really read it. But just based on everything, I feel as though they set a precedent early of what they're going to do. Maybe names weren't thrown in, but it was more. I definitely think they told him it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. We do have you an extended, period of time. My only thing is what happens if this team can, because I know, we talk about LaMelo's injury, but there's Brandon now too is on his second year, and you can hope that it's a anomaly, but that's the only concerning thing is just at what point do you look at the team and say, will we ever get healthy enough to evaluate and go forward?
Real quickly, because Div, I know you need to run. Darian mentioned something there about Mark's upcoming. He's extension eligible this summer. I'd like to give you the opportunity to. Do you think that sort of like that timeline played any impact? I guess how could it not? But how much of a role do you think that played in this move? And just any other thoughts you had before you had to get out of here on the Mark or Cody trades? We'll take them as you're on their way out the door, please.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times the concept of timeline and like having your stars be on the same timeline and all of that, I think is a little bit overrated. Shaq and Kobe weren't on the same timeline. Tim Duncan and Tony Parker weren't on the same timeline. There was enough of a gap there that you'd say they were kind of like half of basketball generation apart. But I think the bigger thing is team control. Like, who are the guys who you feel strongly enough about that you're going to lock them down and make sure that you know what their future is? And the people who you're not so sure about, you don't want to lock them down, right? You don't want to be tied to that and then have to do what a bunch of teams did today, which was give up first or protected first to try to get off of contracts that they were happy about a year or two ago. I think what it came down to is they just ultimately said, we're not going to have a real sense of confidence about Mark, both in terms of on-court and especially in terms of injuries between now and, say 8 or 9 months from now. It's just not likely to happen, right? We're still going to have questions. There's still going to be sort of ambiguity about who exactly he is. And so I think they said, let's get out in front of that with a team that is desperate for exactly the kind of player he could be, right? You never know if another team would be this desperate at any time between now and next trade deadline, especially since his contract runs out at that point. So, I think the proactivity of it is the thing that probably I'm most reassured by. I think to the point you made, Spencer, I think that is a real change in philosophy from being more reactive and saying, well, if something great comes along, we'll take it, but otherwise we'll just kind of keep swimming and, we'll let it go. This was not a let's see what happens kind of trade deadline. This was sort of grabbing the bull by the horns. It's possible that Mark becomes amazing with the Lakers, and people say, well, you guys gave up too much there, but that's the risk you have to take. If you've had a guy for 2.5 years and you haven't gotten clear answers about whether or not he's a part of your future, this is the best that you can do there. And the last point I'll make is I forget who mentioned that we've got to be up there right now in terms of total draft capital moving forward in the entire league. I would actually put us at number 3 right now. OKC is kind of in its own stratosphere year after year. But other than that, I think the only team I'd put above us is the Spurs.
Yeah.
Because they've got 2 unprotecteds coming up fairly recently. But other than that, I would take what the Hornets have right now over just about anybody. And I think that is, I know that's not wins, that everybody would like to see. But that's a real feather in the cap, and it just gives you so many more options moving forward. And so to me, that's the biggest thing of all. It's just if we've got a smart front office in place now, which I think we do, and a proactive one, they're going to have a lot of options over the next couple of years on how they want to use all the assets that they've collected. And I think that's a great sign. Yeah,
Div, and I know you got to run. I mean, that's kind of like a great springboard. The point you just made about the, kind of the kitty of what the Hornets have in terms of future draft capital. Just for a thought exercise here. trading for Nurkic, and sorry, BG, if I'm jumping ahead of where we're going to go next, but if you add up
for it.
Nurkic, Grant Williams, and Josh Green's salary, that gets you like almost to $50 million. And so just I think that's solely why the Hornets ended up doing the Nurkic deal. I think they were probably cold-footed, we'll say, about it for the past few weeks, but to get that kind of number on your books for next season really helps if you want to move that quickly, right? And we don't know that. And Nurkic might just end up dying on the vine, in Charlotte, and we'll take that lesser of 100 million teams first-round draft pick that we got. But just for thought exercise, because I was going through this today. I did a little walk this afternoon, and I was thinking, I was like, here's what I think the Hornets front office, what their top priority will be this summer before the Nurkic trade even came in. They got to sign mid-level salary deals because they have to be able to start adding dollars up to get to said star player or said star players. And so anyways, they've got it on the books next season if they want to take it. Let's just say LaMelo's healthy, Brandon's healthy. They jump out of the gates 10-2. I'm just, hypothetical here. It's all there to go swing when they're ready to swing. So it's exciting.
Yeah, Deontay White pointed out in the chat. This is a little bit of a bummer. Only 17 games combined that Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, and Brandon Miller played together. I pulled this up on PBP stats. Those guys, over the course of 1.5 seasons, basically played a total of 253 minutes together. The Hornets, with a net rating of plus 4.5 points per 100 possessions. Like, you'll never know. I mean, this will be a what if that only like 2,000 dead end Hornets fans will care about, but that is like with good health, like what could this have potentially looked like? But that is neither here nor there because Mark Williams is a Los Angeles Laker. Want to salute him for his time here. There were some fun moments this season. Certainly seeing his growth as a passer is interesting, and he's set up to play with Luka. That's for the next few years. That's pretty exciting for him, and I'm just curious to see where Charlotte goes at the center position moving forward because for the first 3 years of LaMelo's career, we just talked about how they needed to find him a lob guy, and then they find Mark. They barely play together, starting that process back over. But it is encouraging to see this team just doing things that like a small market, like a functional small market franchise would be doing in terms of trading veterans to, I guess, Div. It looks like Div just departed, so we want as he's headed out the door at Mark Williams, we want to thank him for his time as well. But just Spencer, you and I have been doing this podcast together for a long time, man, a really long time, and I think we've been for years now, we've been advocating for the Hornets to do sort of like a longer termed rebuild. Something we've wanted, we've discussed. There was never the patience for it underneath the previous ownership. Occasionally with Michael Jordan, they would they dip down, they would tank for a season or half a season or whatever it is. And they used that to get some good picks and some good players. It was never the sort of like foundational star that they needed, save for kind of LaMelo, which gave them somewhat of a direction, but that process was short-circuited too. They go out, they get Gordon Hayward a week later, and then really it was the 2021 and 2022 drafts that just sort of undid it. The 2021 draft is going to go down as one of the biggest swing and misses in franchise history, period. I mean, those guys are only kind of barely in the league. Ty Jones, JT Thor. I don't think David Bouknight is in the NBA. So, man, that to me really felt like a big swing and a miss to have 3 top 40 picks and to sort of whiff there. But yeah, just I guess I'll throw it to you, Darian. If we're thinking about and then we should get onto the Cody Martin trade, but just sort of thinking about the center position specifically. Where would you like to see them go in that direction in terms of bringing Musa Diabate more online, or is this something that you'd like to see them sort of like go through the draft? I feel like this year they're going to end up being in a place where it's like it will be too early to take Queen or Malawatch. In Queen, as much as I like him, I sort of have concerns with him as like a defensive anchor in the NBA too. But just sort of, I don't know, general thoughts on where they sort of like look for talent at the center rotation in
So
the future
I
here.
personally always have wanted them to get a veteran center, just because like we see kind of what already the Spurs have done with Wemby. They got him. First of all, they got him Chris Paul, and then they got him De'Aaron Fox. I don't know if we can sit here and say that that's the kind of move we'll make, but I would like a veteran center that can play. That's another part, because Taj Gibson is on the roster, and I'm pretty sure Taj Gibson teaches him a lot, but maybe not enough to my liking. So I would definitely like that. But the more realistic, because I'm looking at like the centers around the league, and it is the NBA. The same way we didn't know Luka was available, anybody become available, but I just don't see anyone that I know Miles Turner, but it's not kind of like what I'm looking, you know what I mean? So it's really difficult to say that there's a veteran center we could just pluck and bring them to Charlotte. So I think more than likely it will be through the draft. But to your point, I just don't know. It's going to be too early for any of those guys. And it's not as though Cooper can play the center position or anything like that. So I don't really know where to go. I'm obviously something will have to be done relatively soon, because we do only have Nurkic for another year. And like also I mentioned, Musa can't be the starter. I would definitely love a veteran center. I just don't know how likely that is, and I really don't know who it would be. So I guess time will tell. I think they had to have some kind of plan, or at least their eyes on some people, because as Spencer mentioned, we're accumulating those bigger contracts, and I just don't know if you do that and then make it, put it all together and trade for a wing when you obviously don't even have a center. Or they could look at the NBA as a lot of people do, and unless you have an Embiid or Jokic, the center position, you just need someone to stand there and play defense. So maybe you don't have to, give up as much to get a guy that can be a starter. And if you surround him with enough great talent, then maybe it just won't matter as much. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's the cap for next season is filling up pretty quickly at this point. Especially when you consider this is probably going to be a top 4 pick, and that's a high number. I mean, you're almost like the Hornets are going to have to get pretty creative to stay under the first apron. To be honest, I mean, just right now, and this is from our good friend at Mickley, MCLEY_MA. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should. He's a cap expert for the Hornets. There's not a lot of room left. So, Nurkic is going to have to play next season, I think. I do think that the Hornets will have – so there's 2 ways they could attack this. They could sign a minimum or close to a minimum center and just try to stay under the first apron going into the season, right? Or they could say, screw it, we want another mid-level contract in that, $13 to $15 million range, and say we'll go into the season above the first apron, and then basically we're going to have to get off money at the trade deadline. So it's pretty certain that's kind of the decision they're looking at now, assuming they don't draft a center. And so that's kind of what BG was saying. Like I have not been I have not gotten on my draft prep just yet, but it does not appear from kind of what I hear that there's centers that are worthy of taking in the top 4, top 5. So I think they should take a wing, primarily a defensive wing, or at least leans in that direction, and then attack centers via free agency. So, but so all this is good news that we've talked about, but I wanted to point out, like, there is a little bit of a money crunch coming for the Hornets next year, and they're going to have to get creative. We'll be having a different conversation this day in 2025 or 2020 rather.
They definitely have. I mean, they just have a lot of large mid-sized contracts, if that makes sense. Grant, Miles, Josh Green's, I guess, relatively cheap. Obviously LaMelo's it's a very expensive in pricey contract. And like, yeah, it adds up quickly. And if you're going to add another top 4 pick to the line, that's going to be a big first year salary, for a draft slot too. So
And I would add real quick, BG, even if the Hornets even if they fell way down in the lottery, got like super unlucky, at that point they could look at moving back, and attaching one of
Trade
these
back,
contracts with that pick, to give themselves more breathing room and put themselves in a position to get a legit center, in free agency. So
they're in this interesting spot. Div mentioned OKC and San Antonio a few minutes ago in terms of just sort of like, teams that have the sort of best collection of future draft capital moving forward. Those are also 2 teams. I mean, the Spurs are sort of going through this right now. Oklahoma City sort of like on the other side of it. But those were teams that like clearly had good players, and obviously OKC, it was stalled a little bit because Chet got hurt and missed his whole freshman season, or rookie year. But they had SGA, he's been there the whole time during this rebuild. They've had a guy like Lou Dort, who I know he's like a 3-and-D guy, but he's a pretty important player for them. And like, he goes back to the Chris Paul team too, along with SGA. Do either of you guys have any thoughts sort of on, like, I don't know, do you think this is Charlotte's sort of, for lack of a better term, like their San Antonio or OKC moment as they're trying to rebuild, but doing so not like the Washington Wizards, right? Where the Wizards, it's just like, it's a totally blank canvas. I like Bilal Coulibaly quite a bit. Corey Kispert seems like a nice player going forward. I like some of the rookies that they drafted this past season, including Sarr and Carrington. But the Hornets are in kind of a different spot. I was just open the floor to either of you guys sort of have any thoughts on the Hornets doing this sort of like longer term rebuild, but also doing it where you've got an all-star guard on the roster already. And you've got a guy in Brandon Miller who, not an all-star, but at 20 points per game score, and a guy that I think has all-star upside at some point in his career.
So I've thought about this a lot, BG, and there's so many different ways to think about this, but it is a great point to bring up because it is unique. And my thoughts are this. I still think, I'll start with this point. I think if the Hornets were blown away this summer with a LaMelo Ball offer, and it sounds like he's coming back pretty soon, I think that
I was waiting for someone to bring this up this episode. I was waiting for someone to bring this up.
There's all the fallout in the NBA happens in the postseason, right? And so half the teams are going to be super disappointed. A quarter of them are going to be like, okay, all right, we're building. And then the other quarter of them are going to be like, hell yeah. So I think if the Hornets were blown away at the draft, I think Jeff Peterson has told us with these moves that, yeah, we'll do it, which resets the timeline completely, right? Now, do I think that's the likely – does that have the highest probability outcome? No, I don't think it does. I think that's like less than 20%. I think that – but going into next season with Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball and this draft capital, like, we got to find out what we have with LaMelo. I think trade deadline next year, if the Hornets are sputtering – and there are still buyers out there for LaMelo, or quite frankly, even Brandon at that point, with all the draft. I think it's all for sale. I just think that this ownership group and this GM or this front office are very aligned in that way, and they're willing to play the game that they've seen OKC play. Is your example 1A? It leads somewhere. It leads somewhere good, but you got to be patient. So. Yeah, next season, the uniqueness of it is that it's not a year that we're going to have a ton of high expectations, but if we don't see serious progress from LaMelo Ball in a winning way, we're going to see change. I can almost guarantee that.
And I mean, I'm glad you said that because that's exactly what I was thinking. And I also want to say that I also would add that even if LaMelo, let's say LaMelo does what LaMelo does and has a, looks good and everything, but just the team around him is just cannot keep up. Even then, once again, I think we would see change. I mean, because you got to think about it. as much as I don't believe that the Hornets necessarily will be good next year, the East is still going to be horrible, just like it was this year, just like it was last year. Like the Wizards still aren't going to be any better. Raptors, I mean, I don't know. They're on paper they would seem like they're better, but who knows?
They traded for Brandon Ingram
Right.
today. That's
So-
crazy. That's crazy.
so
that
they got
did
all
that.
these-
the Raptors.
crazy
I don't
that they
know
did
what is going on.
Right. So there's just no telling what's going on with them. Don't know what's going on with the Nets, the Bulls. I just heard that Trae Young may not wants to be with the Hawks anymore. So I think that there's a real chance that if the Hornets are just healthy, they could accidentally end up in the play-in, which would, for all Hornets fans, we would be like, that's a successful season. You don't even have to move anybody if that happens. But if you can't even do that in an almost guaranteed weak East next year, unless something crazy happens, that's where you got to start wondering. Or we don't want to waste your time as the fans. We don't want to waste our time as the front office. We don't want to waste LaMelo's time. I just don't see how we're not at least in the conversation. If your season ends before January again, I think it's also just like you also have to take into account to the years past. It's like, okay, we're just not. It's just not going to happen. It may not be our fault. May not be our players' fault. May not be LaMelo. It could be nobody's fault. But we just know it's not going to be enough going forward because I'm looking at the standings and I just don't see how, if the team is healthy, we just don't accidentally just be around to play in. If you can't even do that, that's serious considerations of just blowing it all up.
I also seems to me like one of those things too, where like that aspect of it almost depends on what happens in the 25
Agreed.
draft, and which is to say that like that's like if they get Cooper Flag seriously.
Well, everything
and, like,
changes that.
Yeah, and I've spent a fair amount of time covering Cooper this season, and like one, he's legit, he's awesome. Two, he strikes me as like a sort of guy where there's just like a standard at play. And obviously, like no matter where he goes, his first year in the NBA, the team's probably not going to be all that good. But sort of in the way that like Wembanyama is different. I mean, he's in line to be the best player in the world sooner rather than later. But like just that the standard changes and that it's like one of those things where it's sort of like winning or losing like won't be tolerated kind of, you know? And that part of that is just like the player's good enough to impact winning, but just that there's a certain attitude that comes along with it too. And you know, I don't know Cooper personally or anything like that, but I've watched all of his games at Duke, some of him at Montverde. I've seen him up close this season. He is a pretty special competitor too, and I think that's any team that's bringing him in house is going to be pretty thrilled about that. Maybe it's Charlotte, you know, we shall see. But yeah, that to me feels like the only way that they can supercharge it like that quickly. But that also just means like Brandon and LaMelo both take a jump. They get a great pick in 2025 and everyone sort of like stays healthy. And like, honestly, I could live with that because they don't have a lottery protected pick, you know, out the door, you know, potentially out the door in 26. And they've got these other future picks coming in pretty soon in you know, in 20, I guess 26, but also certainly 27 is when things start to get like a little bit more intriguing. Spencer, I guess any other thoughts sort of on them trying to like, again, I don't want to go the whole like 2 timeline route, but just sort of any other thoughts on them navigating this space? Anything you maybe would like to see them do in the short term this off season, or sort of like longer term to sort of like set this up a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think the goal this summer should be, and again, it depends on what happens, you know, at the draft and if they make a trade there, if they're able to shed a little salary and create more flexibility money wise. I think it's adding talent, you know, at least net neutral players on net neutral contracts that can have a value in the trade market moving forward, primarily at the center position and at the wing position. You know, one thing that's a really big deal, and I think it's going to end up working out in the Hornets' favor because it sounds like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. Trey Mann, like I think they're going to get him back on a team-friendly deal. Who knows? There's advanced scouts everywhere in the NBA, right? Like it
takes one team,
correct.
but yeah. because he's gonna end up missing 70 games this season. It feels like they should be able to lock him in at some team friendly cost.
You would hope
number,
so, think so, but there are smart people out there, and again, the Hornets are in like kind of a $16 million crunch right now. Then that's before you add the first round pick this summer. So like, there's going to be teams knowing like, hey, I know he's a restricted free agent. Charlotte can match any offer, but we kind of have him over a barrel if we like him that much. So that's a really, really fascinating extension conversation to me. But I think they need to find a center, and I agree with Darian. It needs to be a veteran center that is a good player, can start, has a history of staying healthy and playing a lot of games, and can be flipped at a number that is useful, like not $5 or $6 million, but $10 to $12 million or something more. And that I think that should be priority number one. The other point I wanted to make, just in terms of like what Charlotte's options are now moving forward, which is the most encouraging part. Again, they can get to $50 million in salary next season with all this draft capital if they want to go make a jump. If they're 15 games above 500 at the trade deadline, they won't be, but just for hypothetical. Okay, they can play the middle road, where, as Darian was saying, if they make the play-in, they win 43 games, 44 games, and LaMelo is under contract through 2029, whatever it is. Like time is on their side. And then they can play the long game, where if they stink next season and everything's going south again and we have injuries, or LaMelo's not, or whoever's not playing, they can just say, hey, we're completely pressing reset. So as you were saying, BG, it is a very unique situation, but short term, middle term, long term are all on the table and pretty easily executable because of how they've built up the cupboard, right?
Yeah. Yep. I think and who knows what the thoughts that are happening inside there right now, but my guess would be like, you pitch this as like, I really think that it's like a 2-year sort of like the next season and a half or next 18 to 24 months. That's really when you like lean into the rebuild, sort of like nastier parts of it, I think. And I think the Mark Williams trade signals it. I mean, it signals a lot of things, because when Charles Lee and Jeff Pearson were brought in, we said on this podcast, as I'm sure many people covering the team did, that like, this is a young team, new ownership. They're not going to like microwave, the ninth seed, in the Eastern Conference, and they're taking an even like longer view than I thought they might. But I really think this timeline of, you have the 2025 draft that has Cooper Flag and a lot of other really good players in it, probably some other franchise changing players there. And in 2026, you have Cameron Boozer and AJ DeBanza. And so my thought would be the Hornets, like sort of the next like season and a half. And it's going to be easy this year because so many guys have been shipped out, or a guy like Brandon's just hurt. Grant Williams is not playing, done for the season too. And then next season, you're just not going to most likely, unless you like get Cooper, you're not going to be able to like play yourself into the playoffs in a so-so Eastern Conference. So you're probably back in the lottery, and if you're going to be back in the lottery, well, depending on how one or two other things change, maybe you're sort of angling for the franchise altering guy in that draft if things sort of don't quite work out this season. So I think that's something to consider. And then they've got all of these picks coming on the horizon, and some contracts that I do think are going to be tradable at some point in time. I talked about Bridges, Grant Williams, if he's able to get healthy again. Those are guys that have 2 more years on their contract, obviously beyond this one. So some interesting chips for the Hornets to play for sure. And like, who knows, even if they got Cooper or AJ or Cameron in 25 or 26, like maybe they would still use that as the opportunity to really hit the big reset button with LaMelo, which we've been talking about that's been an option for the Hornets for a while now. It was an option when they had Kemba once upon a time. That was sort of a different set of circumstances given the value of his contract. They chose to not do it, but it's clearly a different era with the with the Charlotte Hornets. We should quickly, if you guys have time, maybe touch briefly on the Cody Martin trade. He was shipped out this afternoon on Thursday to Phoenix. The Suns and the Hornets come together for their second transaction here in the span of 3 or 4 weeks. The Hornets get Yusuf Nurkic and a 2026 first round pick, which is I think based off the deal that Phoenix had with I guess Utah a week or so ago. That's I think there's some like I can't remember who exactly that pick is arriving from, and I would need to sort of double check again on the specifications with that. But the Hornets ship out Cody Martin, who was, other than Miles Bridges, the longest tenured member on this team, drafted in 2019, which is crazy, just kind of crazy to think about. James Borrego, just a different time and place and era. Vasa Misic is sent out, and then we also sent out their Hornets sent out a 2026 second round pick. So I don't know. I would open the floor to either of you guys. Any thoughts on this move? I mean, did it? I guess I would assume it just sort of like falls in line with sort of where you were at after the Mark trade, but did it change your thoughts on the team build at all, or just sort of like reemphasize sort of the direction that they're about to be, departing in?
I feel like it reemphasized just everything that we've kind of been saying. I actually was a little surprised that we were able to get off both Cody and Vasa in the same trade. I thought Cody, most of the time it was saying that he was just going to go to the Bucks for Pat Connaughton. That was like the biggest thing that was in the rumor mill. So yeah, to get off both, I thought was impressive. So yeah, I like the pick. I think it's like the lesser of Phoenix, Memphis, Orlando, and somebody else. And it seems as though at whatever between
Memphis, Washington.
So
Memphis.
At worst, it's going to. I mean, it seems like a guaranteed, possibly top 20 pick. So I think that's good. You can figure out what to do with that after. Well, Memphis kind of makes it a little struggle because they're good, but yeah, you could. I think you essentially just moving that second and turning it into a first for guys that really didn't have a spot on this team anymore. So I think it was a good deal.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I shared a little earlier. I think one of the foundational reasons that the Hornets did this deal is because Nurkic is making $19 million. Let's see. I mean, this year he's making $18 million. That doesn't matter. Next year he's making 19.3. I mean, that's like prime time tradable salary, right? If they wanted to, take a leap, take a chance, and trying to go get somebody. So I like the deal. Nurkic really fell off a cliff like really quickly. It felt like he was a pretty good player in Portland, and he's never been a very good defensive player. And then in Phoenix, he was just kind of like exiled. So I wonder if there's a little bit of something in there somewhere. And I'm sure that the Hornets will explore that, the rest of this season and, check on his conditioning and like, can he actually be a serious rotational player going into next year? I mean, I think that's at least somewhat intriguing to them, but I think the crux of why they did this is his salary number. And yeah, you get a toss in first round pick that, like Darian said, it's going to be something, right? It's probably not going to be great, but it's going to be something.
Yeah, this was it's an interesting move for Phoenix. I mean, I guess it allows them to get off some money, specific because they can decline Misic for next season or whatever. But man, that's I would, if I were like a Suns fan, I would have some sort of like longer term questions about where exactly
they were giving it D-. I was following the Suns page and they're ABCD, and everybody was giving it a D, and it was like 70 something votes, and like it seemed as though 60 of them were D's.
It's pretty ugly there right now, I think, and I think Atlanta's the same way. I don't know where they're going. This is Matt Ishbia. This is an example of it's like the same example as Michael Jordan, where he was just a hands-off, like, I don't give a shit owner. And Matt Ishbia is like, no, I'm going to be the GM. Like, I need to do this. It's like, no, you actually don't.
where are we on the scale with Matt Ishbia? Like, he's transitioned from like new owner syndrome to
Like psychopath.
just way too hands-on. Yeah, it's like you're right on the fence right now, because I think you're getting up to like the year and a half, 2 year mark here, and yeah, man, it is interesting to say the least. Any other thoughts on the Martin deal for the Hornets here?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I'm sad to see Cody go.
Yeah.
To be honest, like it was really fun.
Yeah. Salute to
Yeah,
him for sure. North Carolina guy, got to play with his brother. And yeah, RIP to the Liver Mush boys. With what was it? It was him and Ish Smith, right? I think I have that right. Where the Hornets are now fully not
Martinized. I did see somebody to do that.
Yeah, you had something.
Yeah, it was really fun to watch Cody just develop in Charlotte, and I guess it was right before the extension was signed a few years ago, but I actually thought like he had a pretty legit chance of becoming like a pretty serious rotational wing in the NBA. Because of his size and his passing skills, and like he had enough dribbling chops. Even the fact that he was never going to become a very good shooter, but he's just one of those guys. He scratched out about as much as I think he could have of what he had basketball wise skill. And so it's kind of one of the small success stories that nobody will remember in Charlotte. Anyways, I'll miss it.
Yep. No, it's a good point. I mean, like ultimately he was a success for a second round pick for the franchise. He really was, and it definitely was to his benefit that he perked up in his third season, which was his contract year coming off the rookie deal. He shot it well from deep that year, and I think that's really the thing that kind of kept him afloat. Obviously, he missed a lot of time, and I did want to add some context too, because we talked about Mark Williams' health concerns earlier too. He has missed a total of 105 out of a possible 211 games. Due to just injury in his NBA career. Obviously he missed some time at the start of his rookie season.
Wait, were you talking about Joel Embiid or Mark Williams? Who were you talking about?
That Joel Embiid graphic was crazy. Like he played 400 games and missed 400 games as well.
Yeah, it's Embiid is man, it's a fascinating career.
It sounds like something else I've heard.
It's very similar.
No. But that is concerning. I mean, I think he's looked. I wouldn't say he's looked like his bounciest this season, but he's looked good this year, and he's been able to, I think, for the most part, stay on the court. So I got my fingers crossed. I'll always be a Mark Williams fan, and we'll be pulling for him from afar. And just going forward, what I would say, like obviously the team is going to be. I mean, they've been pretty tough to watch for most of the season, but I would just be keeping an eye on like. If you lose Micic, you lose Martin, more opportunities for guys like Nick Smith Jr., who I think has he's been up and down, has had some rough games. I saw them play against the Pelicans in Uptown a few weeks ago, and NSJ like really struggled in that game. Like really had a bad game.
He runs very, very hot.
And you could tell, like, again, you could just see he was a little bothered by it. He threw a couple of like bad passes, and LaMelo and Miles sort of like kind of went up to him during stops in play and were like, hey, get it together, man. But I would say he's had some good games too. So he becomes a guy to watch for the Hornets down the stretch. Like if there's something there that's interesting, he's obviously could potentially have up to 2 years left on this rookie contract. Former, projected lottery pick that fell to them in 2023. So he's a guy to watch, I think, down the stretch. Same with KJ Simpson. And just like, and then a guy like, Salon too, obviously, like really the young guys, just become sort of like an eval, runway here for the next 2 months with some of the young guys. And I just, one thing I want to get in here too, because we touched on a lot of different stuff, team building, routes and pathways and options, and this is so unique for the Hornets right now. I've never seen them be in this kind of position before, where they were sort of like taking a multi-year approach to building this up to try to be something sustainable in a smaller market. I've never seen them have this many, like this kind of like surplus of picks. I can't imagine it's ever been a thing that's happened before in franchise history. Certainly not in the like, decade that I've been covering them. It's never been like this. In fact, it's always been the opposite,
Yeah.
And
I would-
so there are some tough days and tough decisions ahead, but that is taking that 50,000-foot view, Spencer. That is, as you mentioned earlier, like that is encouraging. So I don't know. Closing thoughts here. Any other sort of ideas and thoughts on Charlotte sort of like really turning a page, something that I think they were already doing before they traded Mark, but it's ramped up another level with a guy like that now out the door and more, so two pretty good draft assets, heading in the door here.
Yeah,
for
my
Los
last
Angeles.
thought, and then I got to run. Like, if you put into Chat GBT to keep it topical here, explain the Hornets trade deadline and the state of the franchise right now. I think it would spit out something like, well, if they got good soon, they have an exit ramp to get better quicker.
Mhm.
If they were mediocre next year, they have an exit ramp to stay mediocre and improve the team. If they stunk next year, they have an exit ramp to play the long game and really see this thing out. That's not something that we're accustomed to at all as humans that have followed this team. And the last thing I'll say is I have not been as excited about this franchise since we were up 3-2 against Miami. Seriously, that's not a joke. That's not hyperbole. I mean, like, I think this is going to be hard to screw up. Like, I think good days are coming, and now, yeah, I know, yeah, I shouldn't say that. Now but I mean, there's so many resources available to people that I trust now that I think we're in a good place. But I got to roll, guys. Thank you all very
Yeah, absolutely, Darian. What about you? And then we can go ahead and get on out.
I mean, I agree with
Closing
Spencer.
thoughts.
Like, there's so many different ways you can go with this team. If you want to try to be good, then we'll see what happens. I think it's all ultimately going to play out as who's performing next year. That'll give you a better idea of what you need to do. But we obviously won't know that till then. So I'm just very interested to see what happens. I think they're going to, take, as much time as they can, not to push things off, but more so to truly evaluate and make sure they're making the right decision. So I know that could turn a lot of people off, but I truly do believe that it's in order to build a better product in the long run. I don't think they're, in the past we've done it because we were scared. I think this time they just want to make the right decision. So.
Yep. Yeah. This is nothing against, obviously nothing against
Right.
Mark. Really good young player. I'm a believer in him, and I liked some of the growth and progress that he showed this season. I really think offensively he's turning into a nice player. Defense, certainly some stuff to iron out, but I will be curious to see. Hopefully, him with good health really get to develop underneath, JJ Redick and LeBron James, and next to Luka Doncic. Moving forward. All right. I would just like to send a quick shout out to everyone who listened or is listening now, the following day on podcast. Richie, thank you for helping organize and produce this. We want to thank Div again for coming back. I'm pretty sure he has to be the most booked guest in BuzzBeat history. So another trophy is in the mail to Div. This was enjoyable getting to talk about all of this with you guys. Certainly a big day in the history of the Hornets, or big couple of weeks in the history and sort of like the shaping the arc. This is a big hinge point, to borrow a term, big hinge point for the Hornets, and it will be curious to see where they go going forward. We will be here to cover all of it, though, sort of starting with evaluating players for the rest of the season, leading into the draft, leading into any other sort of like roster reconstruction, signings, trades that will be ahead. We'll be here to document all of that. If you enjoy our work, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your episodes. We'll read those comments if they're nice and come with a 5-star rating, we promise. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the deadline, or I guess it's over now, but just sort of enjoy some of the coverage of it.